October 1944, Camp Alva, Oklahoma. Feldwebel Karl-Heinz Kunkel, a battle-hardened Wehrmacht sergeant captured during the fall of Cherbourg, witnessed American children, no older than 10, approach the perimeter fence. Freshly arrived, Karl-Heinz expected harsh treatment, but the children, instead of taunting, casually offered small red apples through the wire. Karl-Heinz, who had last seen terrified children in bombed-out Normandy, suspected a trick, a psychological tactic. His fellow Afrika Korps veterans were equally stunned. This uncoerced generosity from children to enemy soldiers was an alien concept, defying German strictures against civilian interaction with prisoners. The unblemished apples contrasted sharply with his meager frontline rations, an unsettling glimpse into an American civilian culture that contradicted all his propaganda. 6 weeks prior, Karl-Heinz had surrendered near Cherbourg, his unit decimated. The Iron Cross second-class recipient became prisoner of war 31G Go 4578. Americans processed him with mechanical efficiency, photographed, fingerprinted, stripped of valuables, and given rope for his trousers. He anticipated beatings, but received sea rations and cigarettes. The 3-week Atlantic crossing aboard a converted Liberty ship, crammed with 2,000 German prisoners, was marked by the smell of vomit and diesel. Despite autumn storms, American guards distributed seasickness tablets and allowed supervised deck rotations. Karl-Heinz, viewing the endless grey ocean, wondered about his enemy homeland. Propaganda films depicted America as a weak, decadent, racially divided nation manipulated by Jews. Yet the guards, farm boys and factory workers displayed casual indifference, not hatred. Landing in New York, Karl-Heinz glimpsed the Manhattan skyline, a sight dwarfing Berlin. The prisoners traveled west by train for 4 days. Karl-Heinz observed endless farmlands, cattle, paved towns, and casually parked automobiles, as if gasoline wasn't rationed, as if the war hadn't touched this place. His fellow prisoners murmured in disbelief. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, a panzer grenadier, repeatedly asked, "Where are the bomb craters? Where is the destruction?" There were none. Camp Alva, a sprawling complex of barracks, appeared on October the 12th. Barbed wire enclosed 640 acres. Guard towers contained board sentries. Karl-Heinz and 437 new arrivals marched through the gate, expecting dogs and shouting. Instead, an American captain, speaking broken German, outlined regulations, work assignments, and the Geneva Convention, emphasizing humane treatment. Karl-Heinz knew German camps rarely honored it. The barracks presented the first impossibility. In Compound C, Barrack 14, Karl-Heinz found wooden bunks with mattresses, not straw, and thin wool blankets. A coal-burning stove stood centrally. The latrine, 50 meters away, had running water and flush toilets. Karl-Heinz, accustomed to slit trenches, pulled the chain experimentally. Water rushed and swirled, the mechanism working perfectly. 2 fellow prisoners watched, mesmerized by functioning indoor plumbing. The food was the second impossibility. That first evening, American guards led prisoners to a mess hall. Karl-Heinz expected watery soup and black bread. Instead, the kitchen served beef stew with potatoes, carrots, and onions, real beef, not mystery meat. Thick, soft, fresh white bread accompanied it. Karl-Heinz received a full tray. Müller whispered, "This is officer rations. They made a mistake, but everyone received the same." Karl-Heinz ate slowly, waiting for a trick. The stew was hot, the bread real, and he felt full, a stark contrast to weeks of hardtack in Normandy. The third impossibility arrived 3 days later, American children at the fence. Karl-Heinz, on a brush-clearing work detail near the eastern fence, watched 5 boys, 8 to 10 years old, approach on bicycles. He expected rocks, recalling German children throwing stones at Soviet POWs. Instead, the boys produced red apples, like those from his father's Bavarian orchard. The smallest boy offered an apple through the wire. Karl-Heinz froze, but Corporal Jensen, the American guard, did not intervene. Karl-Heinz slowly accepted the fruit. The boy grinned, and all five rushed forward, offering more apples. Müller, Schütze Dieter Vogel, and Unteroffizier Paul Schmidt followed suit. The apples were unblemished, crisp and sweet. Corporal Jensen shrugged at Karl-Heinz's questioning look. "Kids do that," he said. Gefreiter Ernst Koch, a translator, explained. Children from local farm families came regularly, bringing apples or cookies. Guards allowed it unless prohibited items were passed. This was normal. Karl-Heinz pondered this. In Germany, such acts were treason. Children were kept kilometers from camps. Here, American boys shared orchard fruit with enemy soldiers like feeding ducks. That evening, processing his experiences, Karl-Heinz wrestled with the propaganda. America was weak, divided, poor, corrupt. Yet he had seen prosperous farms and intact cities. He'd eaten better in 3 days as a prisoner than in 3 months as a sergeant. He'd used modern indoor plumbing. He'd been treated with bureaucratic indifference, more disquieting than brutality. And now, unsupervised children offered apples without fear or hatred. The following week deepened his cognitive dissonance. Camp authorities announced work assignments, agricultural labor on local farms, 80 cents a day in scrip, working alongside civilians under guard supervision. Karl-Heinz volunteered, eager to see more of this impossible country. His group went to the Morrison farm, 480 acres of wheat and cattle. Mr. Morrison, a weathered man, shook hands with the Germans. His wife brought lunch, ham and cheese sandwiches, cold milk, chocolate chip cookies. As they ate, Mrs. Morrison, via Koch, inquired about their German origins, mentioning relatives with German surnames without hostility. Karl-Heinz struggled to reconcile this casual kindness with propaganda images of American degeneracy. The evidence before him contradicted everything he had been taught. The Morrison farm's machinery fascinated the prisoners. A John Deere tractor pulled a combine harvester, cutting, threshing, and separating grain in one pass. Mr. Morrison allowed Karl-Heinz into the cab, explaining controls through Koch. The engine rumbled. Fuel was not rationed. The Morrisons owned 3 trucks, the tractor, and a car, used daily without concern. In Germany, private citizens had no gasoline. Even military vehicles often lacked fuel. Returning to Camp Alva, Karl-Heinz calculated his discoveries. The Morrison farm, worked by one family and seasonal help, produced more wheat than a dozen German farms. American farming's machinery and scale explained how the nation fed itself and supplied Britain and the Soviet Union. Propaganda had dismissed American industrial capacity as Jewish lies. Karl-Heinz realized that the propaganda was the lie. America's strength wasn't just superior soldiers, it was farms like Morrison's, factories, and a civilian population so abundant they could spare apples for enemies. The realization hollowed him. He had fought 3 years, believing in German discipline and will, trusting the Führer's promises of American collapse. Now, in the truck, watching the Oklahoma prairie, he understood the war was lost, always had been. Germany challenged a nation that treated prisoners better than its own soldiers. A nation so abundant, children gave away fruit, so mechanized farmers did the work of dozens. This wasn't weakness, it was overwhelming casual strength. In Barrack 14, Karl-Heinz wrote home to Maria. Censorship limited truth, but he hinted, "The food here is adequate," conveying he ate better than she did as a civilian. The Americans follow the Geneva rules, a contrast to German behavior. I am safe and well treated, an impossible reality for a captured enemy. Sealing the letter, he lay on his bunk, listening to 200 Germans settling for sleep. Some clung to notions of secret weapons, others whispered doubts. Karl-Heinz said nothing. He thought of the American children offering apples, of Mrs. Morrison's hospitality, of Corporal Jensen's indifferent acceptance, of civilian POW fraternization, normalcy. Tomorrow he expected another impossibility, an American film, an English book, more children. Each chipped away at his worldview, forcing him to question everything about the enemy, his nation, and the war's purpose. Propaganda prepared him for hatred, not for the corrosive power of normalcy, for a civilian population secure enough to be generous to enemies. He wondered how many other prisoners shared his bewildering revelation, the collapse of certainty, the recognition they fought for lies, while truth resided behind barbed wire, flush toilets, beef stew, and apples from children who should have hated them but did not. December the 12th, 1944. Feldwebel Karl-Heinz Kunkel stands in the camp store, 80 cents in hand from 2 weeks of farm labor. Shelves stocked with Hershey chocolate, Camel cigarettes, Colgate toothpaste, and Gillette razor blades present items he hasn't seen since 1942. Corporal Morrison, the guard, handles the transaction with the casual indifference of an Oklahoma City shopkeeper. Karl-Heinz buys chocolate and cigarettes, the same brands American soldiers consume. No search, no interrogation, just change from a cash register and a have a good day. This commercial exchange between captor and prisoner, observed with the mundane normalcy of peacetime, clashes sharply with Karl-Heinz's understanding of warfare. His previous stalag in France offered no wages, no store, no economy to French prisoners. That afternoon, December mail arrives. Karl-Heinz's mother's October letter from Dusseldorf details the third major bombing of their neighborhood, the destruction of the Brown family's apartment, and the cellar deaths of Frau Zimmermann and her daughters. She writes of bread rations dropping to 2,800 grams weekly, critical coal shortages, and trading wedding silver for black market potatoes. Karl-Heinz reads this on his bunk, enjoying a 6-inch cotton mattress and American-made wool blankets. That evening, dinner consists of pork chops, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans, white bread with strawberry jam, and chocolate cake. He eats mechanically, each bite a heavy reminder that his mother survives on turnips and black bread. Oberfeldwebel Werner Schmidt, on the adjacent bunk, reads his letter from Hamburg, sets it aside silently, and later in darkness is heard crying. December the 14th, Thursday evening recreation, amplifies Karl-Heinz's cognitive dissonance. The camp gymnasium, a converted warehouse, boasts regulation basketball hoops, volleyball nets, boxing equipment, and wooden benches. American guards and German prisoners play basketball, forming teams without national distinction. Private Jenkins, an Arkansas farm boy, demonstrates a hook shot to Unteroffizier Hans Bauer, a Panzer Regiment veteran. They communicate through gestures and broken English, sharing laughter when Hans misses. In a corner, Obergefreiter Friedrich Klein plays chess with Sergeant Patterson. Their 6-evening match is preserved on a dedicated table. At 1930 hours, in this building, the war is mere historical context. Karl-Heinz observes men who recently exchanged fire, now engaging in friendly competition, further eroding the foundational narratives of National Socialism. He was taught Americans were a mongrel race, weakened by democracy, lacking martial discipline, and unworthy opponents. Yet these men display physical fitness, good humor, and casual strength that contradict every piece of that propaganda. Saturday brings the weekly film screening in the mess hall, benches rearranged before a white sheet. Going My Way, a Hollywood film starring Bing Crosby as a Catholic priest in New York, is shown. Karl-Heinz, having never seen an American film, is stunned by its technical quality. Clear sound, smooth editing, and sophisticated cinematography surpassing wartime UFA films. However, the content disturbs him more than the craft. The film portrays American society with effortless abundance, churches, schools, and neighborhoods untouched by bombing, citizens pursuing personal happiness over collective sacrifice. The priest resolves issues through individual compassion, not institutional authority. No mention of the Führer, the state, or duty to the Volk. Characters make autonomous choices. After the film, prisoners discuss it. Gefreiter Otto Kaufmann, a staunch National Socialist from Munich, dismisses it as Jewish propaganda, claiming Hollywood fabricates illusions to conceal American decadence, but his voice lacks conviction, and several prisoners disregard him entirely. December 18th sees Karl-Heinz assigned to the Schneider farm 6 miles east of Alva. John Schneider, 53, runs 400 acres of wheat and cattle with his wife Martha and son David, who serves with the Third Army in France. The farm's machinery would impress German industrialists: a 1943 John Deere Model B tractor, a mechanical combine harvester, a Ford truck, and electric lights powered by a Delco generator. Karl-Heinz spends the morning repairing fence posts, observing the operation. Every machine functions, maintained with readily available spare parts. Fuel seems unlimited, the tractor running continuously without rationing. At noon, Martha Schneider brings lunch to the field: roast beef sandwiches on fresh bread, potato salad with mayonnaise, pickles, apples and coffee. Sitting on the truck's tailgate, she asks Karl-Heinz, through Guard Corporal Williams, who translates, about his family, home and his feelings about Oklahoma. She mentions her son, shows a photo of David in uniform at Fort Sill, and states she prays for all soldiers, German and American. This woman, whose son fights against Karl-Heinz's country, treats him with maternal concern. Before leaving, she gives him a small German New Testament from the Alva Baptist Church, simply offering it without proselytizing, then drives away in the Ford truck. The Sunday church service on December 24th takes place in the Recreation Hall, configured with a wooden cross and folding chairs. Pastor James Miller of First Baptist Church in Alva conducts Christmas Eve services for prisoners who choose to attend. Approximately 200 Germans, including Karl-Heinz, who had not attended religious services since childhood, participate. Pastor Miller speaks through an interpreter, a German-American sergeant from Texas, but Karl-Heinz now understands enough English to follow directly. The sermon emphasizes forgiveness, redemption, and shared humanity under God, avoiding any mention of German guilt, American righteousness, victory, or defeat. After the service, church women serve cookies, hot cider, and wrapped presents, toiletries, writing paper, and other necessities. An elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, approaches Karl-Heinz, asking in careful German, learned from immigrant grandparents, if he needs anything. He is speechless, unable to reconcile her kindness with his training. She pats his hand, says "Frohe Weihnachten," and moves on. Christmas dinner on December the 25th features roasted turkey, dressing, cranberry sauce, sweet potatoes, and 3 types of pie. The mess hall is decorated with paper chains and a small evergreen tree donated by a local family. Guards share the same meal as prisoners, sitting at adjacent tables. Captain Morrison, the camp commander, delivers a brief speech wishing everyone health and hopes for peace in the new year, notably omitting any mention of victory. After dinner, prisoners organize a concert performing harmonized German Christmas carols that fill the hall. Several guards stay to listen, applauding after each song. Oberfeldwebel Schmidt leads Stille Nacht, his baritone carrying the melody while others harmonize. American guards join in English, Silent Night. For 3 minutes, 200 former enemies share sacred music, their voices blending without irony or propaganda. That evening, Karl-Heinz writes a letter to his mother, a task requiring careful consideration. Americans permit uncensored correspondence, though he knows German authorities will review everything. He vaguely describes camp conditions, affirms his good health, and inquires about neighbors. However, he includes a carefully worded paragraph about American treatment, framing it as observation rather than opinion. The guards here follow Geneva Convention precisely. Work details receive fair treatment. Local population demonstrates Christian charity in a manner consistent with their values. His mother will grasp the subtext. He signs, seals the envelope, and leaves it for morning mail collection. The act feels transgressive, acknowledging truths that contradict all National Socialist teachings. The contradiction becomes explicit during a late-night conversation on December 28th. 6 prisoners, Karl-Heinz, Werner Schmidt, Hans Bauer, Friedrich Klein, Otto Kaufmann, and Gefreiter Ludwig Hartmann from Stuttgart, gather in the barracks after lights out. They speak quietly, wary of ideological hardliners among them. Werner boldly states, "Everything they told us was lies." Otto weakly counters, suggesting it's propaganda to break morale. But Ludwig, using arithmetic, calculates camp food consumption and America's economic capacity to feed 50,000 German prisoners across many camps. "They feed us better than their own civilians ate during the Depression," he remarks, "and they fight a two-ocean war simultaneously. We cannot defeat this." Friedrich adds observations from work details, describing American farms, factories, and infrastructure. Hans mentions camp library newspapers, whose war reporting accurately details German defeats, Soviet advances, and the shrinking Reich. The 90-minute conversation sees each man contributing observations that lead to an undeniable conclusion. Nazi propaganda about American weakness is systematic deception. Karl-Heinz, though mostly listening, internally acknowledges Werner's truth. Everything they believed, everything that drove them to war, everything that justified sacrifice, all were lies. These implications terrify more than comfort. If American abundance is real, German victory is impossible. If American society functions as observed, National Socialist critique of democracy collapses. If individual Americans display the humanity they experience daily, the racial theories justifying German expansion crumble. Each pleasant interaction, generous gesture, and fair treatment undermines the ideological structure that gave their military service meaning. They fought, killed, and sacrificed for nothing. Some prisoners cling to Nazi ideology, unable to confront the void of purposeless suffering. But Karl-Heinz feels his foundations shifting, old certainties dissolving. By December 31st, 1944, Karl-Heinz exists in 2 worlds. The official world, Feldwebel Kunkel of the Wehrmacht, prisoner of war, loyal German soldier, and the actual world, earning wages, buying chocolate, playing volleyball with American guards, eating turkey dinner, attending Baptist church services, and receiving kindness from Oklahoma civilians, who, despite wartime privations, treat him as human. He hears camp radio broadcasts announcing German defeats in the Ardennes, the failure of the winter offensive, and Allied advances. The war approaches its end. Increasingly, he grapples with the question, what comes next? Return to a defeated, destroyed Germany? Remain in America, if permitted? Build a life where such a question is even possible? The future, once defined by military service, territorial expansion, and German dominance, now represents profound uncertainty. Yet this uncertainty feels more honest than the lies that preceded it. As 1945 begins, Karl-Heinz Kunkel has no answers, only observations, experiences, and a growing realization that his captivity in Oklahoma has freed him from something more binding than barbed wire. On June 12, 1947, Feldwebel Karl-Heinz Kunkel arrived in Hamburg, a city 75% destroyed by Allied bombing. The devastation made his 2 years as a POW in Camp Alva, Oklahoma, seem like an unbelievable dream. Disembarking the SS Marine Flasher, which had transported 1,847 German POWs from Norfolk, Virginia, Karl-Heinz was struck by the stark difference between America's abundance and Germany's ruin. He, who had harvested wheat and enjoyed lemonade in Oklahoma, now faced a city of broken walls and a population subsisting on 1,500 calories daily, a third of his POW rations. Karl-Heinz decided to return in April 1945 after Germany's unconditional surrender was announced at Camp Alva. The 3,000-strong POW camp erupted in a mix of relief and despair, many weeping over Germany's collapse. American guards, who had forged friendships with prisoners through 2 years of agricultural work, respectfully gave them space. Karl-Heinz recalled fellow Feldwebels in the mess hall, debating if their home still existed. Some considered staying in America, especially those who had married local women or feared Soviet occupation. Despite his affection for Oklahoma, Karl-Heinz, whose family lived in British-occupied Hamburg, chose repatriation. Repatriation began in June 1945, accelerating through 1946 as the U.S. Army returned 378,898 German POWs. Karl-Heinz remained at Camp Alva until March 1947, part of the final wave before the camp closed. The months leading up to closure were tinged with melancholy, as prisoners and guards who had worked together in fields and on irrigation systems prepared for their final separation. Commandant Colonel James Patterson hosted a farewell, featuring German folk songs and a lavish meal of roast beef, fresh bread, and apple pie. A feast Karl-Heinz knew he wouldn't see again for years. Oklahoma farmers who had employed the POWs also visited, shaking hands and offering sincere well wishes. Tom Hendricks, one farmer, gave Karl-Heinz a family photograph, an image he cherished for life. The 14-day Atlantic voyage on the Marine Flasher was spent largely on deck, Karl-Heinz watching the American coastline recede and dreading Hamburg. Discussions among his fellow returnees revolved around the state of their cities, their families' survival, and how to recount American experiences to those who had endured total war in Germany. Many feared denazification tribunals, despite being regular Wehrmacht soldiers. Karl-Heinz, a logistics NCO captured in North Africa in May 1943, had a clean military record, but worried how his tales of American abundance would be received in a starving nation. His fears materialized into an existential crisis about his beliefs upon seeing Hamburg's devastation. British occupation authorities processed returning POWs through temporary camps, conducting medical examinations, denazification screenings, and issuing new identity documents. Karl-Heinz discovered his parents had survived a partially destroyed apartment in Barmbek, a heavily bombed district. Their reunion was a painful contrast. His mother, once robust, now weighed scarcely 90 pounds. His father, a carpenter, had lost 3 fingers to frostbite during the harsh 1946-1947 winter. They embraced him with tears of relief, but Karl-Heinz found himself unable to speak of America for weeks. He couldn't describe Oklahoma's casual abundance, the children treating German prisoners kindly, or the wasteful daily meals when his parents bartered heirlooms for black market potatoes. Karl-Heinz found work with a British organised reconstruction crew, clearing rubble and salvaging bricks. This back-breaking labour, paid in British military marks and occasional food, was barely sufficient, but provided employment in a city where jobs were scarce. He worked alongside other POWs, Eastern Front veterans, and civilians who had never left Hamburg. The differences in their perspectives were striking. Russian front veterans spoke of horrors that made Karl-Heinz's North African service seem mild. Those who endured Allied bombing and Soviet advances carried incomprehensible traumas. When Karl-Heinz spoke of Oklahoma's respectful treatment and abundant food, his co-workers reacted with disbelief transitioning to anger. Some accused him of being brainwashed by Allied propaganda, while a former panzer commander insisted Karl-Heinz must have been in a propaganda camp, asserting that true American POW camps were as brutal as the concentration camps now publicized by the Allies. These experiences silenced Karl-Heinz about America for almost 2 years. He suppressed memories of Oklahoma summers and the dignity shown by American farmers and guards. Tom Hendricks's photograph remained hidden, and he never again mentioned children offering lemonade or shared church services. Yet the silence troubled him, especially as Nazi atrocities revealed by the Nuremberg trials and mandatory documentary viewings organized by British authorities became undeniable. Karl-Heinz, a logistics NCO, not a fervent Nazi, had still believed elements of propaganda about American decadence and Jewish conspiracies. His POW experience had shattered these illusions, and watching footage of Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz, he felt profound shame for Germany's actions and his own deception. In 1949, Karl-Heinz met Margarete Schulz, a Stalingrad widow working as a British military government secretary. Her practical resilience appealed to him. They married in October 1949, after the Federal Republic of Germany's establishment, and moved into a new apartment. Margaret was one of the few with whom Karl-Heinz openly shared his American experiences. She listened without judgment, understanding his unique perspective. Their son Thomas, born in 1951, was partly named after Tom Hendricks, a fact Karl-Heinz never explicitly told Margaret. Ingrid, their daughter, followed in 1953. Karl-Heinz's career mirrored Germany's reconstruction. In 1952, he used his logistic skills to transition from manual labor to clerical work at a construction management firm. By 1958, he supervised housing projects in Hamburg's expanding suburbs. Germany's 1950s economic miracle rapidly brought prosperity akin to what he had seen in 1940s Oklahoma. He never forgot the contrast, nor how quickly abundance could vanish or propaganda warp perception. Refusing to join any political party, he maintained a studied neutrality. When pressed, he stated that America taught him ordinary people are similar everywhere and ideologies blind men to simple truths. As his children grew, Karl-Heinz shared curated POW stories during family dinners. He spoke of Oklahoma's landscape, farmers' kindness, and the strange experience of working alongside Americans who held no hatred. He recounted children waving at labor crews and church women baking Christmas cookies in 1944. Tom Hendricks's framed photograph hung in his study. His children, fascinated, grew up with a nuanced understanding of America, distinct from Cold War anti-American sentiment. Thomas's decision to study American literature at the University of Hamburg in 1969 quietly pleased Karl-Heinz, acknowledging his influence. Karl-Heinz retired from construction management in 1979 at 64, dedicating his retirement years to reflection and storytelling. In 1982, a Hamburg newspaper series on German POWs in America featured his account. This led to reconnecting with 4 former Camp Alva prisoners. They met quarterly for coffee in Hamburg, sharing memories and marveling at how their POW experiences shaped their post-war views. Friedrich Weber, one of them, even revisited Camp Alva in 1976, meeting aged farmers who remembered the German work crews. Weber's photographs and stories were treasured by Karl-Heinz, who never could afford the journey himself. The legacy of German POW experiences in America emerged through academic research and museum preservation in the 1980s and 90s. Historian Arnold Kramer's 1979 book, Nazi Prisoners of War in America, documented that 425,000 German POWs lived and worked across the US with a death rate under 1%, significantly lower than other theaters of captivity. Camp Alva received a historical plaque in 1986, though the camp was demolished in 1948. The University of Oklahoma's Oral History Project collected POW testimonies, including Karl-Heinz's written account in 1988, 4 years before his death. These efforts highlighted a consistent POW experience: initial culture shock, gradual humanization of the enemy, severe reverse culture shock upon returning to destroyed Germany, and a lasting impact on political attitudes and transatlantic understanding. The disparate treatment of German POWs in America versus Allied POWs in German camps became a significant historical study, influencing post-war Geneva Convention revisions. While 95,532 American and 27,465 British Commonwealth POWs died in German captivity, fewer than 3,000 German POWs died in American custody, mostly from accidents or natural causes. This difference, along with testimony of humane treatment in American camps, bolstered international efforts to strengthen POW protections in the 1949 Geneva Convention. The American military incorporated these lessons into its training, emphasizing that humane treatment served both moral duties and strategic purposes by encouraging surrenders and upholding legal standards. Camp Alva became a focus of Oklahoma's heritage preservation in the 1990s. The Cherokee Strip Regional Heritage Center in Alva established permanent exhibits displaying artifacts, photographs, and oral histories from both German prisoners and American guards. Local historians documented the POW's agricultural contributions, noting they harvested over 300,000 acres of wheat during wartime labor shortages. Several Oklahoma towns hosted reunions between former German POWs and American guards in the 1980s and 90s, events publicized by local media that highlighted the unexpected friendships and mutual respect forged across the barbed wire. Karl-Heinz Kunkel died in Hamburg on March 7, 1992, at 76, having witnessed German reunification and the end of the Cold War. His obituary in the Hamburger Abendblatt noted his North African service, his time as a POW in Oklahoma, and his advocacy for German-American friendship and democratic values. At his funeral, his son Thomas described how his father learned in Oklahoma that propaganda was poison and human decency transcended national boundaries. Tom Hendricks's framed photograph was buried with Karl-Heinz, a symbol of their cherished 45-year connection. The German POW experience in America offers crucial lessons in conflict, reconciliation, and enemy treatment. Modern military ethics training often references the W2 American POW program as a model for humane treatment, serving strategic interests and moral standards. The contrast between Nazi brutality and American adherence to Geneva Convention standards proves that civilized treatment of prisoners is possible even in total war against ideological foes. This insight has shaped, though not always successfully, American detention policies in later conflicts, revealing the continuous tension between security and humanitarian obligations. The cultural exchange fostered by POW labor programs left lasting marks on American agricultural communities. German POWs introduced farming techniques, preserved historic buildings, and sometimes formed relationships leading to post-war immigration and business ties. Dozens of German POWs returned to America permanently in the 1950s and 60s, settling in communities where they had once been prisoners. This small but significant reverse migration transformed enemy soldiers into immigrant citizens, possible only due to the humanity and cultural exchange experienced during their captivity rather than brutality. Karl-Heinz Kunkel's story, alongside thousands of similar accounts, illustrates how basic dignity and limited cultural exchange can undermine indoctrination and foster democratic values. The children who offered lemonade at Camp Alva likely never fully understood their impact, but for Karl-Heinz, these gestures of humanity held more persuasive power than any propaganda. In an era of total war and genocidal ideology, the mundane kindness of American civilians and the relative comfort of POW camps became powerful arguments for the values the Allies claimed to defend. Ultimately, such stories demonstrate that humanizing the enemy, even during existential conflict, serves both moral imperatives and practical purposes in achieving post-war reconciliation and lasting peace.